he gives us a discussion of what he calls the passions, and then there are various indications of the direction that an ethic would take, but that's about it. In order to get at the passions, we have to see again the mind-body relationship. So let's get clear about that. That mind and body are two separate substances with properties that are completely different. Consequently, mind can function independently of body, and body can function independently of mind. Even though there is causal interaction between the two, they are in other regards functionally independent. His picture of the body is that its functions can be explained simply in mechanical terms, in terms of processes caused, the animal spirits coursing through the body, and so forth. In other words, bodily movements, bodily changes, are all physically produced without the aid of the soul. Now, to us perhaps that sounds déjà vu, but certainly not in Descartes' day, because the conception of the soul in the medievals, as in the Greek world, was that it's the soul that enlivens and moves the body. It's the principle of locomotion as well as of nutrition, and the life-giving principle as well as the rationality in humans. So the body then is a self-operating kind of mechanism independently of the soul. Now, the soul, on the other hand, has two kinds of functions. It has its actions, active functions, that is to say, voluntary activities. Voluntary activities that include making decisions, or imaginative thinking, where you choose to think of something, conjure up images, actions of the soul. Reasoning is an action of the soul. Imagining is an action of the soul. They take the exercise of will. But in addition to those active functions, there are passive functions of the soul. And it's these which are called the passions. Passions are passive functions of the soul. They are awarenesses, conscious states, caused by bodily changes. Conscious states caused by bodily changes. And that's likely to include physical feelings, perhaps dreams, pains, pleasures, desires, and such like. The way he specifically defines passions, he says they are those perceptions, sensations, or emotions which specifically refer to the soul, but which are caused, maintained, and fortified by some movement of the animal spirits. The animal spirits being these physical fluids that explain life processes. So they are perceptions, sensations, emotions caused by bodily changes. Now, make sure we're clear about those terms. Emotions, physically caused, all right. Sensations, yes, we were talking about sensations as they appear in Meditation 6, in connection with our awareness of our own bodies. Sensations are physical feelings of one's own body. But perceptions, sense perceptions, not just particular sensations of particular feelings, but the perception of particular physical bodies, caused by bodily changes. So he has a causal theory of our perception of physical bodies. But he's distinguishing, remember, between perception, which is caused by external agents, and in that sense is adventitious, and on the other hand, imagination, which is our creating of images, and is therefore factitious. And on the other hand, innate ideas that God has given us. Those three kinds of ideas. Distinguish between conception of ideas that are innate, general ideas, abstract ideas, conception. That is purely an act of the intellect, an active activity of the soul. Distinguish that from perception. Perception distinguished from conception. Perception has to do with sense perception of particular things. And it is perceptions which are among the passions of the soul, those consciousnesses caused by movements of animal spirits, by bodily changes, that is. And how does the cause-effect relationship take place between two things so utterly disparate? It takes place, you remember, in the pineal gland, P-I-N-E-A-L, the pineal gland, which, as he puts it, is suspended over that passage through which the animal spirits move. And so it's the movement of the animal spirits in their appropriate conduit past the pineal gland, which induces these states of consciousness in the mind. So there's his mind-body relationship, and his definition of passions of the soul is simply spelling that out a little more fully in terms of the way in which the body influences the soul. Okay? Now, in reverse fashion, the soul can have causal influence over the body. How? By virtue of its active functions. That is to say, the reason, the intellect, is able to represent to itself ideas of consequences that might follow a certain bodily action. And in considering those consequences, the mind can will not to pursue those things, and can change the desire which you have to do that particular action. So it is by virtue of mental representations of consequences that the mind is able to modify the desires, those passions, which would lead us in certain directions. And Descartes is apt to think that the more clear and distinct the idea the mind has, the greater its influence over the passions. Now, keep that in mind, not only for what we're going to say about Descartes and moral psychology, but for what follows next week with Benedict Spinoza, because he is very much the Cartesian, pantheist though he is, and has essentially the same view of the relationship of reason to emotion as Descartes has. Now, the outcome of this, then, is that such emotions as desire, wonder, fear, jealousy, anger, gratitude, remorse, emotions of that can be affected by the mind, even though they're produced by physical causes. And the moral life becomes then a matter of reason controlling, guiding the passions, and therefore the behaviors of our bodily life. Now, what you have then is reason guiding the will and influencing the passions. It is right reason, there's that phrase again that comes down to us from Scotus and Occam, that we found in Bacon and Hobbes, now it's in Descartes. It is right reason, consequential thinking, you see, prudence. It's right reason that must guide the moral life. And as Descartes put it, right reason makes life more bearable. How does it do that? Because it gives us power. Knowledge is power. There's the Bacon theme paralleled in Descartes. Right reason gives us power to change what we can. Change our passions, desires, as well as changing some things about the world around us by scientific means. It gives us the power to change what we can, but also the power to have contentment of soul when there is nothing more we can change. Contentment, changing the restlessness of our feelings for contentment. Power over the passions. Well, you say, this sounds very much like a Stoic kind of ethic. Yes, it is. Copleston makes that observation. Becomes pretty evident. And of course, in the Renaissance, there was a resurgence of Stoicism, particularly in regards to its ethic, and here it is very evident in Descartes. So that's the way his moral psychology works. But I want to add to that two or three observations about the fact that this is rooted in his overall position. There are, it seems to me, four streams of thought in Descartes, which all focus on what would be an ethic if he had developed it more systematically. Okay? So that you can, in those ways, anticipate, construct, as a ghostwriter would construct, for Descartes, his ethical theory. One of these streams of thought is about the passions and the power of reason to rule the passions. The second stream of thought is about the mind-body relationship, such that mind is a separate substance rather than part of the physical world. Now, you see, since the soul is not part of the physical world, but is a separate substance, it's not an ingredient inherent in nature in the physical sense. The mind, as it were, stands aloof from nature, free from many of its causal processes, free to change nature, to modify nature's processes, and you get the same kind of notice in Bacon about the power that knowledge gives over nature. Now, both Bacon and Descartes, therefore, have been accused by some environmental advocates of our day of laying the groundwork for the abusive domination of environment and the raping of natural resources, which has gone on. Because if we're not part of nature, if our minds are not part of the natural order, but are able to dominate it independently, then well and good, this is what we've done. The rule of reason becomes the rule of science, which becomes the rule of technology after the Industrial Revolution, and as a result, the effect on environment. That, at least, is the interpretation that's given. Now, in addition to that mind-body relationship, then, emphasizing the exercise of power over nature, there is the will and intellect relationship, which we saw in relationship in regards to the problem of error. Error in rational judgments we make in Meditation 4. Error in perceptual judgment about physical objects. The will and intellect interplay come out in Meditation 6. But insofar as error is a kind of evil, cognitive evil, error is to truth what evil is to good, then plainly that will and intellect interplay applies to the good and evil issue as well, deciding what is good and what is evil. Let not your will go beyond what you know in your intellect, you see. So the same kind of advice, the rule of reason in guiding the will, as in these other regards. But then, the fourth strain which flows into this ethic is a kind of provisional morality, which he poses towards the beginning of his discourse on method. Now, that's a shorter work than the Meditations. Its focus is much more on methodology, even though he runs through the same general line of thought as in the Meditations. But when he has established the problem regarding skepticism, before he sets out to rebuild a philosophy from scratch, he sets out what he calls a provisional morality he will follow at this stage, even though he is so ignorant in terms of the knowledge that he's after, so ignorant as to whether or not this is unequivocally the right thing to do. Now, this provisional morality is interesting for the reason that it fits in perfectly, it seems to me, with what would be the conclusion of his inquiry, leading in this way into an ethic. It's a thoroughly prudential ethic, guarded by being reasonable, in order to avoid bad consequences. Precisely that. So let me read snatches from it. The first moral maxim is to obey the laws and customs of my country, constantly retaining the religion in which by God's grace I've been brought up since childhood, Now, that was a very prudent thing to do in days of persecution and controversy and so forth. And in all other matters, to follow the most moderate and least excessive opinions to be found in the practices of the more judicious part of the community in which I would live. Now, why be such a moderate? And his reason, as he puts it very simply, is then, if I should be in error, I won't have strayed too far from the truth. So don't take extreme positions. If you don't know for sure, just take a moderate position and play it safe. Number two, second maxim, to be as firm and determined in my actions as I could be, and not to act on the most doubtful decisions once I had made them, any less resolutely than on the most certain. In other words, don't waver. Make up your mind and act. Why? Well, this frame of mind frees me from repentance and remorse commonly felt by those vacillating individuals who are always seeking as worthwhile things which they will later judge to be bad. Don't keep wavering and be remorseful. Just get and do it. Sin boldly, if you like. Why? Well, think of all of the emotional turmoil of people who are always second-guessing themselves. This is a better way to a contented mind. Number three, my third maxim was always to seek to conquer myself rather than fortune, to change my desires rather than the established order, and generally to believe that nothing except our thoughts is wholly under our control, so that after we've done our best in external matters, and what remains to be done is absolutely impossible, at least as far as we're concerned, we will be contented that we have changed what we could. Well, that's precisely where his ethical thinking comes out in the end. And then finally, the fourth, I planned to make a review of the various occupations possible in this life in order to choose the best. And he goes on to say, I decided to stay with this philosophical occupation because I know of nothing which gives me greater contentment of mind. So there it is. What was it the Stoics said? Absence of pain in the body and trouble in the mind. That's Descartes, very quickly. So Descartes' ethic, fascinating. Now, questions, comments?
How far does he go in his controlling the passions? Does he prefer to lose them altogether? Does he just want them nicely?
No, because there are some passions that are positive. You see, if passions include perceptions and sensations as well as emotions, to lose them altogether would be to have no sense perceptions. You see, and if on the other hand he were to say, well, let's kill off all our emotions, then he would have no feeling of contentment. You see, there would be sort of an anomia. It would be sort of a dead, feelingless existence. And that's not what he wants. He wants a feeling of contentment. Dorothy? The second part of. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, he was not a social activist. No, because he's going to obey the laws of his land. That would be in personal life. Yeah, yeah. And you see, the reason he gives. Let's see. Well, let me read a little more in that paragraph. Even if the direction is chosen at random, travellers finally arrive at some destination, not perhaps where they'd like to be, at least, but at least where they'll be better off than in the middle of a forest. So if you're lost in a forest, at least start walking. You see. Situations in life often permit no delay. When we can't determine the course that's certainly best, we must follow one that's probably the best. And when we cannot determine that, select one and follow it as though it were certainly best. If it isn't a good one, at least the reasons for selecting it were good. Now, this frame of mind frees me from the remorse felt by vacillating individuals. You see. That business of if you don't know, at least start walking. You know, that's picked up by Jean-Paul Sartre in his image of the human condition, naufrage, shipwreck. You know, we're alone in a boat without rudder or compass on an ocean that has no bounds. Which way shall we row? Doesn't make any difference, just row. You see, that gives meaning to life while you're alive. So Sartre takes it in a very different direction, but Descartes' original idea. Once again.
I was curious as to what his criteria for choosing the best occupation. Criteria for best, it seems
Yeah.
best suited him based on his.
Yeah, best certainly in terms of consequences. In terms of, I think you have to say emotional consequences. Yeah. Yeah, best in terms of handling the passions, a life of contentment, absence of pain in the body and trouble in the soul. Yeah. Descartes had the reputation, by the way, of being a tireless debater, so that in the Parisian salons of the day, the social evenings, he would take a very unpopular position and argue it against all comers. And when he had them convinced that he was right, he'd say, well, now let's look at the other side, and then he would turn the table over and argue the other side of the thing.